All right. Well, we are really excited that everyone is here. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the country you're in. The agenda for this evening will be just an introduction, and then we're really lucky to have Dr. Wesley Burks here. He's going to talk about the field of allergy and immunology and just his experience in it. And then we have just wonderful presenters who are going to talk about the vast array of career choices you can make in allergy and immunology. And then we'll have a question and answer session. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host to introduce herself, and then I'll be back.
Hi, good evening, and welcome everyone. I'm Deepti Deshpande. I am the chair of the Fellows in Training Committee here at the Quad AI. And since we're talking about careers, I was exactly in the fit shoes not very long ago. And I was so fascinated with allergy immunology that after about 7 years in academic medicine and pediatric hospital medicine, I transitioned to doing a fellowship and then subsequently attended the Quad AI faculty development program where I met several of you who have been amazing mentors for me, and then transitioned to work in late clinical development in industry and work as voluntary faculty in academia at Columbia University where I trained. And it helped me find the balance between clinical research and the joys of academic medicine, which is a really happy place. And I'm so thrilled for this career panel because a lot of them shaped my career path here. So thank you, and we're excited. Dr. Scherzer, back to you.
And I'm Becky Scherzer. I am an allergist immunologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital and The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. I spend my time in a mixture of a clinical position. I do a lot of education with medical students, residents, and fellows. I love the field of allergy and immunology. I hope through this afternoon, this evening, you're going to hear again just the wide array of choices you can have in the field. I was a budding neonatologist my first year and a half of pediatric residency. And then for anyone who knows Dr. Sleesman, saw a patient with Dr. Sleesman who had severe combined immunodeficiency, and that changed my life because I was just enthralled with the idea of helping patients with primary immunodeficiency disorders and walking through those diagnoses for those diseases and helping with the treatment options. And that field has just exploded. So again, you'll hear a lot about our field as we go through here. It's okay if you don't know what you want to do for sure, but ask questions, talk to people who are in mentoring roles, and you'll get a good feel for our field. There's a couple of things we want to mention as we go through the session. This session will be recorded. All attendees will be muted during the session. At the end, we have a Q&A or a question and answer portion, and you'll submit your questions in the chat feature. And the moderators, we will look through and filter those questions and ask those questions. We mean it when we say, if it's important to you, it's important to us. So don't hesitate to ask whatever questions you have. Your internet connection will solely depend on what you have for access during the meeting, and there can be different devices that will slow down. I think for the most part, the internet and Zoom has gone really well, but certainly if you have any issues, we're happy to help. Please be aware of any background noises that might happen should you be unmuted. And we would like, if possible, if you're comfortable with it, leaving your video on as much as possible. And in respect of time, we're going to keep trying to hopefully move forward, though there is some wiggle room in this. We left a large amount of time for question and answer. So again, we want everyone to have their time to really explain how they fell in love with this field. We're really lucky because we're going to start this session with Dr. Burks, and it is just an honor to introduce Dr. Wesley Burks. As you go through medicine, you'll see there are giants in every field, and Dr. Burks has heard me say this before, but he is one of those people. He is one of those people that everyone in our field knows. Through his cutting-edge research and clinical care, he has improved the lives of countless patients with food allergy and other atopic disease. He has been an outstanding educator and mentor to, I can't even probably count how many people, if you think about medical students, residents, fellows, he was a fellowship director for years, and peers in the field. He is someone that you can always reach out to for help, and he is always willing to help. Dr. Burks has had many roles throughout the years. He is currently the Dean of the UNC School of Medicine and CEO of UNC Health. He has served on the American Board of Allergy and Immunology, the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, the World Allergy Organization, and was the president in 2011 of the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. Again, it is an honor and privilege to present Dr. Burks.
So Becky, thank you. And thank you all for being here today. It's nice to see each one of you. So I'm going to talk just for the next few minutes, and we'll look forward to interactions with you later. I know my career started probably pretty similar to yours, that I initially trained as a pediatrician, followed by training in allergy and immunology. And as Becky talked about a little bit, during my career, I've had different roles in research, clinical care, education, and now healthcare administration. And I'm excited to hear from Becky and Mitch and Princess and all the others later as they talk about their career paths and just expanding the opportunities that each of you can think about in our profession. So I want to take a few minutes to share my background and things I hope will be helpful for you. They asked me to share allergy and immunology career pearls. I'm not sure what I'm going to say has a lot of pearls in it, but I'll do my best. I don't like at all to talk about myself. So please indulge me just for a few minutes, because that's really the only way I can put into context the things I'd like to tell you. So we'll get started. So the first one is look and listen with your heart for the aha moments that are career changing. So my journey and early training started in Arkansas, and then I went to Duke to do my fellowship in allergy and immunology. And I was fortunate enough to meet there and eventually work with and be mentored by Dr. Hugh Sampson and Dr. Rebecca Buckley. At that time, when I trained, food allergy was a nascent and in some ways really a to be avoided research field. Hugh had done some early seminal work just before I got there on histamine levels after food challenges. And literally during the first year of my fellowship, I was choosing between working in food allergy and cystic fibrosis. So, but one patient changed the course of the journey, and this was a 4-year-old girl named Shelley. I can tell you the room in Duke South where I saw her. She had severe atopic dermatitis, like really severe, like erythema all over, allergic rhinitis and food allergy. We thought she was allergic to milk and egg and possibly peanut. We did an oral challenge. There weren't oral food challenges, the OFCs that you talk about now, to milk and egg, and she had a really severe reaction to egg that I remember well. The mechanisms we had to discuss were limited. There were CD4 and CD8 T suppressor cells, antigen-specific IgE, a lot of unknown. The skin prick test was used to diagnose patients, and most then were overdiagnosed. We had RAS testing available. The score was 1+ to 4+, but we weren't exactly sure what to do with the results. So this patient, she changed my life literally, from seeing one patient at a time to thinking about a disease and how to change how we take care of a disease. During that course, I was convinced that food allergy was a field I wanted to pursue. I liked the clinical interactions, the patients. There were plenty of opportunities to change how we understood the mechanisms and the disease itself, and eventually how we change and take care of patients. So again, the first pearl as you think about it is look and listen with your heart for those aha moments that are career changing. The second one is, I don't think this will be a too novel one, but seek out and find good mentors. That early patient and the experience in Dr. Sampson's lab started me on a long research and now administrative career. Hugh and I collaborated on research projects, had research funding and a lot of publications, but there was also an area that I took the lead on and worked on early on. It was peanut allergy. Over the 15 years after my fellowship, even as we moved back to Children's Hospital in Arkansas, I worked with Hugh a lot, both during my fellowship and from the frequent interactions with him. I learned a number of things. Some of them I emulated and I did. Others that didn't fit my personality, I couldn't do or I didn't do intentionally. I am sure that I frustrated him many, many times. I have vivid memories of before several research talks as a fellow and then even as a young faculty member, sitting with Hugh, sitting in a hotel room as he listened to me practice the presentation and gave me feedback prior to the presentation. He had it timed about how many at a certain font, double-spaced lines on a page, how long it should take, and we were timed. This was in the age prior to computers. Yes, there really was such a time for some of you. The talks and then manuscripts later were in hard copy, and then you would do it and the edits came back with red ink on them. And there was a lot of red ink from Hugh. He just really reveled in it. And he'd learned to use his red ink from Dr. Buckley, who used even more of it. So as with all his mentees, though, he got to know us as a person, and we continue to be friends to this day, some 35 years later. So it started with some questions that needed answers and a mentor to help guide me. It's important, as people have talked about with you for a long time, to seek out good mentors. And I say that with an S. There's just not one. There's never going to be just one. I'm talked about one right now, but the mentors will guide your practice, your research, likely affect the trajectory of your career like you did mine. But you have to seek them out. They're not going to come and ask you, can I be your mentor? Leading my own research later, I try to do the same, encourage and support younger researchers and clinician educators, encourage them to have an impact on their patients and how they understood a disease. At times when I can reflect, I find it gratifying to think about the work with Hugh and Dr. Stacy Jones and now Dr. Edwin Kim and many others, how there really is a better understanding of the mechanism of food allergy. There's an FDA-approved treatment for peanut allergy, and there are new treatments coming that there weren't 35 years ago. So when you start your job search, look for the availability of mentoring at that place where you look and other places. What kind of support do they have for you? And importantly, it needs to be there, but it also can be other places. So second pearl, seek out and find good mentors. So the third one is develop relationships in our field and in our profession. I went to my first academy meeting as a fellow, and I didn't miss one until COVID hit last year. Over that 35 years, I've developed a significant number of personal relationships with faculty from other institutions and physicians in practice in industry. I've been to other organizational meetings for pediatricians, for academic leaders, healthcare administrators, but the academy was always a constant for me. I know you've heard the networking term, that it's critical, but honestly, my intent was not to network, but just to meet people and develop relationships with them, and in those relationships, learn from them. I said for many years to the people that I work with that the only person who can truly understand what you are doing in that special niche that you have is often at another place. If that person's doing exactly what you are where you are, then they probably don't need two of them, and you may not be there very long. I say that tongue in cheek, but you really will have these relationships that come from other places because they understand exactly what you're doing that people at home may not. I encourage you to prioritize building professional relationships, and like mine, they become personal over time. Attending meetings like the Academy is a great place to start, but there are other places you'll find a few, not too many, and stay with them so that you develop those relationships over time. You'll learn new things from them, you'll meet new people, and your life will change in many, many good ways. From those interactions and relationships as a researcher, you get new ideas and new directions, new thoughts. As a teacher, you see how people help others learn, and you change how you help others learn. As an administrator, you watch how others, they conduct meetings at the committee meetings, how they get people involved, how they lead. And as a person, you see how others conduct themselves over time. These connections, as some might call it, really are just relationships, and in many ways equally important to the mentors you develop. So the third pearl, develop the relationships over time. The fourth one I would talk about are there are seasons of life, and hopefully that will be more apparent as I walk through this. And now almost 35 years of professional work, which is really hard to say, 35 years. I've been at 3 unbelievably good institutions, each very different in their own right and each good. Where you sit now in your life and career, it sometimes feels that you need to have the next 35 years planned out with goals and milestones at each point. My suggestion is that you look at what you're doing or getting ready to do as a season in life, knowing there will be multiple seasons, and you may do something similar or quite different in each season, and you don't lose sight of that. I started out doing mostly translational research and clinical care with very little administration. Then in the next season, I continued to do translational research and added research administrative work, and that lasted part of a season. And the next season, I changed institutions, something I never, ever thought I'd do or we would do as a family. and continued the research, but did divisional administrative work. And then the next season was departmental in school of medicine and less research, but still a lot. And now it's almost all administrative work for a school of medicine in the healthcare system. This is honestly not anything close to what I thought I would be doing, but I like it. And hopefully I'm having some impact on the individuals I work with, the organization and people, but just in really different ways. During each of those seasons, I acquired new knowledge professionally and personally. I learned new skills that allowed me the opportunity to do something different in the next season. And I can look back now on the different seasons and see the common threads and lessons and how they built on each other. And I never had or could do now if I hadn't had those other seasons. And I think that happens at each season in our life and in our career. So the fourth pearl, there are seasons in life, and think about it. The fifth one, take care of yourself and your family. Along the way, as I said, from Arkansas to North Carolina, then back to Arkansas and back to North Carolina again, there's a theme there you can see. My wife, Jan, and I had 3 kids. Jan worked as an attorney for the federal government. In those different seasons, I coached kids soccer and basketball until they were 12, and they outgrew the knowledge I had. I played a lot of age group tennis and exercise and now golf. I do things at work now I would never have done in an earlier season of life because I wanted to do those other things. The profession of medicine, big picture, is unbelievably rewarding, but it's also unbelievably demanding. I've said many, many times, I cannot imagine doing something different now. There are times along the way I may not have thought that, but now I really can't. You read and people talk about work-life balance like it's a figure it out and it's that way forever. But I've said for decades that if this question isn't always there for you all the time and you feel some tension in where it is, then you've lost the delicate balance that you need. It's not to obsess over it, not to think about it all the time, but you can't not have those discussions with yourself and your family and others. The answers are different, what you'll be doing in different seasons of life. I firmly believe the pandemic has only underlined how important it is to make sure that you take time for self-care and caring for those around you. My big ask of you would be to start or stay in those good habits, how you eat, sleep, exercise, time for you, your family. The amount of time and how you do this in each season is really different. And just remember that. I encourage you to find interest outside of work and ways that help you manage the stress from work and the resiliency, however you might describe it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Take care of yourself. You'll be better equipped to take care of your family and others and do your work. Okay, enough of my preaching. That's good. So fifth pearl, take care of yourself and your family. So in closing, I know you're thinking about what's the best fit for you and how can you utilize your medical and your life training to make the most of your gifts and the opportunities that you have. It ultimately, though, is about expectations. And let me say that again, it's ultimately about expectations, both yours and the people you're talking about working with. What's the best match for them? There's not a right or the same answer for each one of us. Both sides, as you come to an opportunity, you have to and they have to have the same expectations or it's not going to work out, whatever that might be. I started to talk about a patient that influenced me, Shelley, and how that patient was my aha moment. Not long ago, I was presented with another patient. Her name is Ellie. As a 4-year-old, she had seen her allergist 3 times during her life. They were able to take care of her by using the history and exam in ways we didn't understand that a long time ago. Her skin prick test had real meaning. Less than 3 millimeters, greater than 9 or 10 millimeters meant something to the people that took care of her. Her in vitro IgE, her immunocap, gave them guidance, and they had numbers and they knew what it meant, not like a RAST 1 through 4+. And they did OFCs that were just like oral food challenges a long time ago that all of a sudden had a name. And they were only being done if they were needed. Her diagnosis was egg allergy. She'd had 3 significant allergic reactions prior to her diagnosis. And over the next couple of years, she's outgrown her egg allergy. Even though she started ingesting in peanuts at 6 months of age, she developed cashew allergy. The mechanisms that we talk about now, mast cells and basophils, IgG blocking antibodies, antigen-specific T cell responses, IL-4 and 13, and a host of other cytokines, cell signaling that we understand better, designer molecules for immunotherapy. A lot's changed in 30 years. We do have a better understanding of the mechanism of food allergy, although there's still a lot to learn. And clinically, doing nothing, which is food avoidance, is sometimes not the right thing and no longer acceptable for most patients and providers. This patient that changed my life, she is Ellie, my granddaughter. She's now 5 and a joy to be around, although I've not seen her for 14 months during this crazy pandemic. But as I sit back and reflect, it's exciting to know the work that so many have done over the past 30 years changed the outcome for this girl, for a special girl for me and my family. And as I encourage you going forward, the work that you'll do in our field will change even more so the lives of so many people in the future. So Becky, I'll go ahead and stop now, and I'm looking forward to the others talking and our discussion later. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Burks. This was such an insightful and inspiring talk, just listening to your life story, and the lessons are so so real. And I think, you know, all of us in the audience, um, you've touched our lives in ways that you may not know. So thank you so much for this advice. And we'll now move on with our very inspiring and accomplished panelists who also showcase some of this diversity in our field of AI that we see in different paths. And as we saw with Dr. Burks, some of them have changed directions and been in more pathway than one. And that, you know, Dr. Burks really mentioned the life seasons and what matters at what different points. And these are people that have successfully navigated so many different career paths. We're so, so excited to welcome them. We'll have each of them speak with us, and then once they're done addressing the group, we'll begin our Q&A session. Our next speaker is Dr. Princess Obaku, who is the Chief of the Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Rheumatology at University Hospital's Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. And she also is involved with other Quad AI activities. I have heard her speak, and it's really a pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's so hard to follow Dr. Burks. That was an amazing talk, and I learned something too. And so I loved hearing about the seasons, and that's so very true. And also hearing about taking care of yourself, especially going through this super unprecedented time. So I am so impressed that you all are on here tonight, and I hope that you learn a lot and it's insightful for you. So thank you for the introduction. I am a division chief of Allergy, Immunology, and Pediatric Rheumatology. I actually just left a different institution, previously worked with Dr. Scherzer and Dr. Grayson at The Ohio State University. It was a co-training program director. And so now it's a little bit different in a different role. And although I'm following Dr. Burks, which is very difficult to do, I think I have the easiest 5 minutes with you all because it's probably the career path that you are most familiar with. Being a clinician educator, seeing as you all are in various stages of training. And so I would love to share at some point, can't do it this time, but I'd be happy to tell anyone kind of my path to getting to allergy and thought process with what I wanted to do. But the major draw to being in academics and being a clinician educator is that I love to teach. And so having that opportunity to share knowledge and to learn from those that I taught or that I still teach is really what helps me stay very engaged in what I'm doing. I've had the privilege of working with, you know, the most brilliant fellows, and I love the challenge of always having to stay up to date, being able to break down knowledge in a way that people can understand. I love to teach my patients too, and so it's always the greatest compliment when I see a patient and they say, wow, this is the first time I've really understood what I have or what's going on. So being in that setting of, academic clinician educator, I think of myself as an educator, not only for the trainees, but also for the patients and also for the community. And so the second part of really being where I am is having impact, and having that impact across the board was really important to me. So being able to be a resource to the community. So I do some media, locally, and being able to share that knowledge from, I think, a trusted source is really helpful. Being able to teach, obviously trainees, residents, fellows, medical students, and then being able to learn from others. I love the opportunity to work in a collaborative environment. So having all the specialties, seeing complex cases and talking. We would always say at my prior institution that, it's nice to have a family environment where you're always bouncing things off of other colleagues and learning. I feel like being in the setting I am gives me the opportunity for lifelong learning, but then also the opportunity to pass that on so others can kind of carry that baton as well. So, and then lastly, clinical research. I like the opportunity to be able to engage in clinical research. And in the current position I have, I'm able to do that. And so for me, the biggest things were community, being around other physicians where I could learn from, I could bounce things back off of, I could take care of complex patients within systems and be able to reach my fellow colleagues to do the best that I could for my patients, being able to being an engaging learning environment, being able to contribute research-wise, and then of course being able to make an impact both at my institution with national positions and for the community. So those are all of the things that drew me to my current position. And again, like I said, this is one that I think you all are so familiar with, just being at your institutions. But I don't regret the choice. I do agree with Dr. Burks, though, that, things change over time. So it's always a wonderful thing to, throw yourself wholeheartedly into what you're doing, but also pick up skills so that if you ever decide that you want to make a change, you've sort of learned new things so that you can make those changes. And I think I've made some, mini changes along the way, and so happy. I've definitely taken what I've learned and moved it forward too. So I will wrap up. I think I have my 5 minutes, but so happy to see you all, and hopefully you find this session helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Babu. This was very insightful in a clinical educator role, which is a position that a lot of fellows look at interviewing for. So that was very helpful. Our next speaker is in the academic physician scientist role, Dr. Mitchell Grayson, and I am so thrilled to welcome him here. He is the professor of pediatrics and chief of the Division of Allergy and Immunology at Nationwide Children's Hospital and The Ohio State University. He is the Grant Moreau III MD Endowed Chair in Pediatric Research. And I have to admit, everything I had heard about how amazing he was has just multiplied after I met him earlier today. He is funnier than I had imagined and way more awesome. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks. I don't know what I could say. I should just stop now. Well, thanks so much for having me here. And it's great to see all of you. Welcome. Happy afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. And as you heard, I am Division Chief of Allergy and Immunology at Nationwide Children's and The Ohio State University. I have to say the because they pay me more if I do that. I'm a physician scientist, and what I'm going to talk to you guys about is really sort of why you would do a physician scientist career and how you would go about that in these 5 quick minutes. I'm not going to ask if any of you are actually interested in a bench science career, because I know enough to know that nobody's going to raise their hands. But I'm hoping that out there somewhere, there's at least a couple people. So the reason why you'd be interested in a bench career, and I don't know if you want me to touch on clinical research too, because I don't know if is Tanya on here or is she not?
Dr. Grayson, if you can touch on both roles, that would be amazing.
Okay, I'll
We'd be
do my
very
best. Wesley
grateful.
could do better than me, but on
They're
that. But
both are yours now.
what?
They're both yours now.
Well,
What the
thanks.
topics?
So the thing behind a research-based career, we'll go back off whether it's clinical, bench, or translational, is that you're really interested in asking questions and getting answers. And while you can do research in other career positions, like a clinician educator, for example, that Princess just talked about, what I'm talking about is where you spend most of your time doing research. And so you really are talking about a position that has 70, 80% really protected time for doing research. And the goal is really to have your own research operation. Now, it's a little bit different on the clinical side than it is on the bench side. So on bench side, it tends to be that you're running your own lab with your own people. It's a little bit siloed. Clinical research tends to be much more group endeavor, engage with multiple people, both internally within your institution and externally within other institutions. So networks and things like that. But the idea in terms of protected time focused on research is essentially the same. That means that you're looking at much less clinical time. So in general, you're talking 1 to 2 half-day clinics a week. Some people have a little bit more, some people have a little less, but it's not usually a major component of your career path. So if you got into allergy and immunology because you're really interested in sort of asking those questions, why does a mast cell degranulate? Or why is it that we can give certain people peanut if they have a certain serum-specific IgE level and they're not likely to react? That, those kind of things, that's where you would be more interested in. If you're more about individual patients and your patient interactions, the research-based career is not going to be as good for you, because the reason why is that to be successful in the funding environment we're in, you really need that amount of time that you're spending doing the bench or the clinical research. And I'm not talking about translational because I don't know what translational research is. So it applies to both of these, I guess, in some way. And if someone really knows what it is, please tell me. Now, in terms of a research-based career, you're talking about positions that could be in medical schools, which we all know about, or things like research institutes, or even things that are a little bit different, like health departments, where you could be doing epidemiology research and other things like that. And I think the key thing about a bench research career or a clinical research career, it goes back actually to what Dr. Birx had said, is that you really want to have, you need to have very good mentors. And these are careers that take time to develop. No one, well, I shouldn't say no one because there's always going to be someone, but most people that have a research career, when they start off, don't suddenly get a science paper, win a Nobel Prize, and forever thereafter get every grant they apply for. It's a little bit different than a clinical-based career, because a clinical-based career, you will have patients coming to see you. From a research career, it's slow in the beginning. I'm not going to say it's not for anybody. And there are difficulties in terms of getting funding and getting your papers accepted. And there aren't necessarily, it's not the greatest thing in the world. Sorry if my dogs are barking in the background. It's not the greatest thing in the world. They're agreeing with me on this. When you have a paper rejected or your grant is rejected, but that's actually part of the career development that occurs. So what is really important here, and it's important in any career, but is getting mentors and having mentors that have been through all of this and can actually show you the path forward and how to be successful. It's not a whole lot different than any of the other careers in terms of that, but you will struggle a little bit. Now, all those few people that wanted to raise their hands would now take them down. But the joy part of the research career is when you find something that nobody else has ever discovered before. And so on the bench side of this, it's really if you're interested in mechanisms. How do things work? And honestly, finding something for the first time, nobody's ever published this, nobody knows this even exists, is really a fantastic experience. And that sort of, wow moment. And then you get sort of, with that, you become the expert, and you are the person that everyone goes to talk about that item. That's going to get you, if you care about prestige and that kind of stuff, you get sort of invited to give these talks, and it's wonderful from that point of view. You get interviews and all that kind of stuff. And really you are sort of driving a specific area forward. On the clinical side, it can be like that, but it's usually a lot more like you're, again, within a network and a group of you are moving and changing the clinical practice of allergy immunology in this case. It's a little bit different because usually you're not finding a mechanistic aspect. You're asking more of a clinical question of how can we treat and how can we diagnose people, which is, again, slightly different. But again, you are working to sort of have an impact on the broader whole of the specialty, not an individual patient in front of you. It will eventually trickle down, but the idea is it's more widespread. And so that's really, I think, the big difference there. Again, the careers are going to be driven much more from a standpoint of, I want to ask those questions and I want to be given the time to sit and think about that and work through those things. So my protected time to do research. I'm going to spend a lot of my time writing grants and writing papers. I'm going to spend my time in meetings discussing research plans and research protocols, less of my time seeing patients and working about that. But again, if that's what interests you, if that's what you like doing, it's a fantastic career and it's wonderful. I mean, I get to go in every morning, go to work and start thinking about crazy things about what I do, which is why do viruses drive potentially drive allergic diseases? Why do they drive production of IgE? They do, by the way, in case you didn't know that. And what is all of that there for? And I get paid to do that. And I get to go play around in my lab or have people play around in my lab for me. And I will say that's one other thing about the bench science. While you start off with getting your hands wet and doing the research, once you start moving up the ladder, you start getting further and further away, and to the point where you actually just tell other people what they should go do or encourage them to do things. That's good and that's bad, but it is what happens in the career. So, at this point, I just tell other people what I think they should be doing, and they go do it or ignore me, whatever they want to do. But, and I think on the clinical research, it's a little bit of that, but you're still a little bit more involved in sort of making those protocols and implementing and seeing the patients in that. So I don't want to drone on about this, but I think the key thing for those who are considering a career and sort of research-based, it's the question of what do you like the most? Is it seeing the patient? Is it educating the patient or fellows? Or do you really like that discovery piece of trying to figure out a new way of treating patients or trying to understand why it is that this cell or that cell does things and potentially lead to a new treatment for whatever diseases? If it's the latter thing, then I think it's really the research-based career. And the key thing then is to find good mentors, because you will struggle. And what you want to do is, when you are struggling, have mentors that are able to tell you, just calm down, it's going to be fine. We've all been through this. You will get your grants. You will do fine if you persevere. And I think that, to me, is sort of the key piece to a research-based career. So I'll stop there now that I've probably convinced everyone to run for the hills. But and thanks for letting me drone on there for a bit.
Thank you, Dr. Grayson. That was a very helpful thought in terms of how to navigate the scientist role, more focused on research and lesser patient care, and how to navigate it clinically versus the research side. And thank you for that insight. With that, I'm going to segue next to Dr. Stone, who did exactly that with clinical research. He did education at the NIH, and also has been an amazing mentor for the Fellows and Training Committee as the board liaison for us from the QuadAI. And he's done all of these things and recently transitioned as the Associate Director for Therapeutic Review in the FDA Division of Pulmonology, Allergy, and Critical Care. And I'm so intrigued with your career path and looking forward to hearing about it more. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Stone.
Great. Well, thank you, Deepti. I appreciate that. And it's a real pleasure to be here and be on this committee. So I trained as a pediatrician at Children's National Medical Center, went to Children's Boston, trained in immunology, and stayed on there for a short time as faculty. And when I left, I moved to Children's National back in Washington, D.C., and I moved for family reasons. My wife was from the area. Her dad was still in the area. We had 2 young kids. And I tried to start a research career at Children's National. So there I had a K grant to do some basic immunology research. I participated in asthma research as part of the Intercity Asthma Consortium, which is an NIAID funded asthma consortium that had moved to Children's National at the time that I was there. And I also taught NIH fellows that came through my clinic while I was there. It was a rather small program. There was one other allergist who had been there. And I have to say it was a rather demanding environment to start an academic career. And it goes back to some of the comments that Wesley and Mitch had said previously about the importance of being having a good mentor and being in an environment where you can really start up a productive research career early on. I was contacted by Dean Metcalf at the NIH about a position there doing primarily medical education as program director for the Allergy Immunology Fellowship program there. And I was at the NIH for about 12 years, both as a program director. At the end, I was a deputy lab chief of the Laboratory of Allergic Diseases and had several administrative roles there. And in June of 2019, I ended up moving to the FDA. And, you know, one of the lessons is you never know where you're going to end up. So I don't think anyone on this call, and I may be wrong, but sort of has a career goal of ending up being a medical officer at the FDA. And what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about, Melody is going to talk about the NIH, but I'll talk a little bit about careers at the FDA. There are connections to my past. So when I was on faculty at Children's National, I had an outstanding resident who went on to do an allergy immunology fellowship with Dr. Birx at Duke, and she moved from Duke to the FDA. So when I moved to the FDA, Stacy Chen was my mentor. So someone who had been my resident early on, I moved into this strange environment, regulatory environment. You know, it's actually been kind of fun, sort of connecting different parts of my career. The FDA, it's a primary public health role. It's ensuring the safety and efficacy of new drugs, ensuring security of drugs. In the time of COVID, I have to say we've been particularly busy with COVID therapeutics in review. Positions at the FDA are not things that people train for. So it's a career path that involves extensive training. So there's essentially a master's level program that goes over 2 years to train new employees of the FDA in clinical trial design and statistics and drug law and the different regulations and working in teams. It's a very interactive, we work in large multidisciplinary teams, and I have to say one of the most amazing things to me is the depth of knowledge at the FDA. Any product that we review, it's not just clinicians, it's statisticians, it's chemists who are experts in quality control, folks that are experts in devices, things like self-injectable epinephrine devices or nebulizers, things like that. So it's a multidisciplinary team. So it's a career path that people don't think about. It's a very important and satisfying role. You see a lot of data. So every application that comes in, you're evaluating primary data for efficacy, safety to help make regulatory decisions. You're seeing safety data that comes in when things are approved and on the market. When there are concerns, you're analyzing a lot of data. For folks that go there out of training, so people go to the FDA, some come straight out of training, some go mid-career. Folks that go straight out of training, the advantages really are work-life balance, that there are opportunities for doing teleworking. Most medical officers at the FDA have a day of professional development where they're seeing patients, which I think is in a primary regulatory role. I think it's good for the soul to continue to see patients, and I think it's good to maintain sort of your connection and understanding of those things that you're regulating. So I'm happy to take questions. I think my 5 minutes is up, but it's a unique position at the FDA. And at the end, I'm certainly happy to take any questions that anyone has. But you know, you just have to be aware that you may end up somewhere completely different than where you think you're going to end up. And in part, you know, it's circumstances, opportunities. But the best thing you can do as you go through your training is to continue to build skills. Never miss an opportunity to learn something new, build new skills. Leadership skills are absolutely critical in any role as you progress through your career. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions when we get to the Q&A. But thank you again for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. This was such an interesting talk, and we don't necessarily, think about positions at the FDA. And when I started looking for jobs, I met 15 minutes with so many different people. I sent a CV and I said, "Can I talk to you for 15 minutes? What exactly do you do? And what does your day look like?" And I hope I get to be on the other side of the table to learn from you. I'm in industry now, and I do hope I will have more opportunities to learn from you. But I can exactly understand the learning curve for me when I started in industry was I had no idea what the terminology meant. Leave aside the regulatory guidance. It's a different world. It's fascinating. It's exciting. And I am so looking forward to hearing more at the Q&A, but learning from you over time. Thank you for this talk. Our next speaker is my favorite, Dr. Melody Carter. I got to meet her when I went to the Quad AI faculty development program and have an academic crush on her. She is absolutely inspiring. She's a staff clinician in love with mast cells, and I don't really love the mast cells, just adore her. In mast cell biology section at the National Institutes of Health, NIAID, and Laboratory of Allergic Diseases. We are so thrilled to welcome you here and would love to hear your story.
Well, thank you for that gracious introduction and having me be a part of the panel. I am going to go through this pretty rapidly because I studied to be a pediatrician and thought that that's what I would do all of my life until I met Tom Platts-Mills and started doing clinical research as a pediatrician while at Emory University. And as I was thinking about after 15 years of peds of doing an A&I fellowship, I just remember Dr. Sullivan telling me, it's not a prison sentence. If you choose it and it doesn't work out, you could do something else, or you could do what you've been doing. And so I think that what Dr. Burks has said about the seasons and being able to make different decisions based on your career path is important. And so being in a mast cell biology lab, I never thought I would end up there, but it allowed me the opportunity to focus on a pediatric disease because A&I is, birth to death type of fellowship. And so, you tend to gravitate towards things that you're comfortable, and I'm more comfortable with peds and don't really like seeing adults that much. But so I was able to kind of make myself with, Dr. Metcalf in mast cells into kind of a mast cell biologist focusing on pediatrics, but also looking at other diseases that focus on the mast cell. So at the NIH, the one thing that I do like is that you can pretty much do anything. And someone told me a long time ago, they said, you can study a molecule at the NIH your entire career and stay there. But if you can't take that outside of the NIH, you have to think about developing yourself as a more global person like Princess did, as she studied eosinophils as an allergist, but has made that into a career, and she's a specialist in that now because you have those options at the NIH. And so at the NIH, we have these research clinician positions. You can do bench research even as an MD without an MD PhD. There is a transitional track that Mitch talked about where you actually kind of sit in the middle. So you can see patients, you can do lab work, and you can figure out what your patients are doing based on the lab work that you get support for. And then, now we're famous for the Vaccine Research Center and developing of the, helping to develop the Moderna vaccine. And they've gotten a lot of press on that. And so a lot of our fellows that go to the Vaccine Research Center, because they do these large clinical trials with lots of patients, they tend to gravitate towards industry after that, because industry likes people that have had that kind of training. And one of the things that we don't mention in government is that some of our fellows actually work at military bases as a civilian. So you can actually have that as an option also. And so at the NIH, we have all these different positions. You can specialize in one disease or one molecule, and what you don't have to do is what Mitch talked a lot about, was write grants. So it's helpful to be able to find someone to mentor you in a field that you're really interested in, and you can learn without the pressure of having to, is this going to get published? Am I going to get a grant? But really kind of develop your career so that you can take that outside of the NIH if that's what you want to do. So it allows you that freedom to really grow in the field and to develop and really become the person that you want to be, and have just so many options. Some of our fellows have even gone into epidemiology labs and done different things that are not just straight allergy immunology, but you can focus on immunology. We have a big primary immunodeficiency group now. So it's just that there's so many choices at the NIH. Sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, but it's at least there. And then we also have so that's intramural, that's on the NIH campus. And then we have the extramural, which everybody was probably more involved in and know more about, because they are the grantees, the grantors for you to apply your grants. And so they actually take, fellows can go directly after fellowship into kind of a medical officer position, where you have you support the grants that are being submitted at the different universities. So that's in the US and internationally. So you are involved in helping to develop the protocol, oversee and implementation of the protocols, and looking at safety. You're helping to write up the final data and analysis. You get to organize workshops. And so it's a totally different world. It is more administrative, so they do allow, I think it's a half day per week that you can have clinical patient care, so that you can see patients and as Kelly mentioned, to try to keep that connection with patients. But it is more of an administrative position, and some people it's helpful because they don't want to spend a lot of time with seeing patients and doing things like that, and it does give you a better life, kind of family life balance type of situation. But it's an interesting position. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'll be open for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. This was a great insight into the NIH process. I got a private message after that saying, "I share your love," from Dr. Melanie Carter. And there's a story with how amazing you were.
Thanks.
That you were very approachable and lovely in a discussion about a complicated patient. You had never met Christy. You spoke with her on the phone, and it was a beautiful moment of teaching. Thank you. So
thank you.
Much, much appreciated. And next speaker, we have two speakers from private practice, one in a solo or smaller practice and one from a larger practice. That'll give our trainees a flavor of what it takes to practice in the community. And there's such different questions that come to mind when you think of these different types of practices. My next one is Dr. Mohammed Yassin, who is an allergist immunologist practicing at Allergy, Asthma, and Pulmonary Associates in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And we're hoping to hear about your journey navigating the solo small group practice, especially with tips on how do you navigate it in today's times in the COVID environment. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I finished training in Cincinnati with the late Dr. Bernstein and Dr. Tom Fisher and Michelle Liller and David Bernstein, and Dr. Leonard Bernstein offered me a job and he asked me to stay there. Dr. Tom Fisher offered me a job and asked me to stay there, but inside me, I always had something about business. I just wanted to be a solo practitioner. I had some ideas differently, but I had no mentors. And that's where I'm coming to what Dr. Wesley Berg said and Dr. Mitch said, you need to have a mentor there. But the solo practice is not for everyone. You really, if you are not a planner, you don't know how to organize very well, you don't have great communication, probably don't have to be a doctor, but also you cannot be in solo practice because you need these communication skills, you need all the things to be in solo practice. Really solo practice is something I am glad I had been practicing by myself for 28 years. During this time, I had trained many doctors who came just to start their own practice, stayed with me for a year, and went back to start their practice, and I helped them to start their practice. I had 4 doctors who did that. So it's something that I enjoyed a lot. Solo practice is fun to me. For me, I'm really having fun. My best days are Mondays. I'm excited to go to work. Why? Because I designed the practice the way I would like it to be. My style of the practice, I'm very personal. I like to know the people. I know the community where I'm living in. I'm in Minnesota, in a small town, just outside Minneapolis. It is very family oriented, and I raised 3 kids being a solo practitioner, and I enjoyed that because, as a solo practitioner, I can design my practice when I practice, when I go, when I coach a basketball or a soccer or whatever I need to do. So it was kind of nice. I'm also able, when actually I had been recognized one time by the colleges, had never missed a college or the academy meeting. Ever in my 28 years of practice, or 29 years of practice now, except now this time it is virtual. But it is just always had been, I can go to both meetings and I sit down and listen to Mitch and learn from him, and listen to Dr. Wesley Bergs and all the people there and coming. So it is kind of, you have the best of both worlds as a solo practitioner. Many patients, the advantage of being by yourself is also when you see the patient, you don't need to read 10 pages to know about the patient. If I'm covering today someone else's patient, one of my partners, it is great. You have covering, but you go, you don't even know the patient. Well, are you here for your asthma? And the person says, no, I came for my skin. Oh, okay. And so I don't have to deal with that. I did that. I practiced in different specialties before I came. I practiced internal medicine, pediatrics. I was a pediatric cardiac surgeon. I did lots of things. So to me, in a practice in a group is kind of difficult for me. I like to know my patients. That's a big advantage for me. I also, as a solo practitioner, can really set yourself in the community and get recognized very well in the community because you can shine the way you want. You can be part of the school board or do anything you want in the community there. You also can set yourself and set high standard. Sometimes other partners might have different ideas what's important for them. It is always, and also made me become the physician who are really patient centered kind of oriented. I always want to please the patient, take care of the patient as if this is my daughter or my child or my mother or my sister. So always kind of had that focus all the time. You also, from the finance part of it, you own your own building if you want to, and that's by itself is a retirement for you. Another thing, you can also design your retirement and anything. And sometimes people say, how about vacations? I take vacations 3 times a year, always for 28 years. I take vacation 3 times a year, in addition to going to the both meetings, which are not vacation, but it is a way of vacation too. Also, you can hire sometimes. Now with the hospital is someone to cover your office if you need for injections or things, or have a plan. One of the internists around you can cover you for that if you have a big injection practice, which I don't. The problem with the disadvantage solo practice, initially, the initial planning is really a hassle. It's something that you really stressful and you have to plan it very well. I just had a doctor, after he was working with someone for a long time, he came and he spent a week with me a couple of months ago. We sat and stayed in my house, and every day went with me to the office and put down for him what are the things he needs to do. He literally had a notebook filled with information. So you need to really, the planning is very stressful. You have to be good at it. Also, you need to learn management. And that's where we have the practice management, have to plug in here for practice management. That's a committee I love, and I have been there for a long time, and I liked people to join us, especially as the fellows. You should really come. You learn, and you can call us. You can call any of us, and we always help you with anything. But also, the disadvantage, you are practicing alone. When Princess was saying, you have your group, you have partner, people to talk to, and you ask them questions. You don't have that, and that's a disadvantage. But now, with the FaceTime and other tools, you can talk to anyone. I still have, I speak to people all over the country. They call me or I call them. And always that's something nice. Another thing that's really is a headache for many people is the succession plan. What do you do? Who am I going to give the practice to? Who's going to come and practice there? That's really the easiest thing, because even if you walk out from your practice, financially you'll be doing better than someone working in a group, because you'll have a building, $2 or $3 million building there. So it is not, I don't see it as a bad thing, but there are some people there. To talk about private practice, you can talk about it as not just 5 minutes, for 20 minutes or an hour or two, is still, you will have more questions. I would like, guys, to get my phone number. If you can write it for them, please, and my address and my email, and feel free to call me. And also feel free to come and spend time. It is beautiful. Minnesota is absolutely wonderful. It was minus 40 all last 2 weeks. So anyone is welcome to come here. So I'm going to stop here and answer questions at the end. Thank you for inviting me again.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain. This was a wonderful little journey through your experiences in private practice and running it solo, which is so different from our next speaker, Dr. Lisa Winterroth, and we're so thrilled to have you here. She is going to give us a glimpse into the private practice large group setting. She is an allergist immunologist practicing at Northwest Asthma and Allergy Center in Seattle, Washington. And Dr. Winterroth, we're so excited to hear more about your journey.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you all today. So you heard a little about solo practice. So I am in a larger group private practice, and private practices come in all different sizes, but our particular group, we have 7 different offices and 15 different physicians across those sites. So it's a relatively bigger one. For me personally, I'm also pediatric trained. I did my pediatric residency down at Stanford, and then came up to Seattle for my fellowship at the University of Washington in allergy and immunology. And when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do after fellowship, I knew I wanted to see patients, but I also, liked some of the other things that have been mentioned. I liked teaching, I liked clinical research. I had a particular interest in food allergy and did a lot of clinical research during my time as a resident. So I was trying to find a way to blend my interests in a career, but also deciding between, do I go into academics or private practice? And for me, private practice offered, flexibility, autonomy, different things that I wouldn't necessarily get in academics, in terms of being able to have more say in determining how much time do I spend seeing patients versus teaching or doing research. And so, I'm very fortunate in that my group is more of a hybrid private practice, where it's a bit of a hybrid between academics and traditional private practice, and that we have a close affiliation with the University of Washington, and we actually act as a teaching site for the fellowship program in pediatric allergy. So in my role, I get to act as a mentor for residents and fellows who come through our clinic. I get to teach them. And then, as I mentioned, there's also opportunity to do clinical research through my particular practice. We have a clinical research site it's now known as the Seattle Allergy and Asthma Research Institute, and we do a lot of clinical trials there. But the nice thing about our group is that, there are some partners of mine who just want to do clinic full time. There are others who aren't interested in the teaching maybe, and you can kind of choose your own route, so to speak. And so I found to be a very nice aspect of the large group practice. Furthermore, as has been mentioned by many others here on the panel, the importance of good mentorship. Going into my career, I wanted to make sure that I had good mentors, and I'm very lucky to have some wonderful partners in my own practice, senior to me, who have helped me along the way in terms of mentorship. And so I think that's another nice aspect of being in a larger group. Some of the other things that I've enjoyed about being in private practice, as I mentioned, is having more autonomy, but also just more say in terms of the decision-making process of how the practice is run on a day-to-day basis. So our group has weekly meetings where we all get together. Sometimes it's a bit too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, because it is a larger group, but it is in some ways exciting to be involved in that process of kind of dictating how the practice is run. We in general have a consensus on how we practice as a group, but there's also some freedom for individual differences in terms of how you see your patients and how you practice medicine in general. And we have a nice mix of pediatric and adult trained allergists, and so there's always someone you can shoot off a question about a complex case that may not be in your area of interest or something you're particularly familiar with, and there's always somebody who's better versed in the group who can help you out there. So that's been a nice thing as well. Some of the challenges of being in private practice, have been mentioned previously, but in this day and age, there's a lot of focus on the costs of running the practice and having to be concerned about the business side of things, which unfortunately you don't get a lot of training in the business aspect of medicine during residency and fellowship, but I've learned a lot being in a private practice setting. So when you are looking at a group, if you're interested in going into private practice, you want to get a good sense of how they run and what the overhead costs may be. Other things to be considering and thinking about when you're looking at a practice is, what's the standing of that practice in the community? Do they have a good referral network from other, general pediatric or internal medicine offices in the area? As I mentioned, our practice is in a bit of a unique setting in that we do not have a pediatric allergy clinic at Seattle Children's Hospital. And so we are kind of the main site for pediatric allergy in the greater Seattle area, which has been very fortunate for us. But again, it's important to kind of look at the community you'd be practicing in and get a sense of, are you going to have plenty of patients flowing into the practice, or is that going to be something that you really need to work to make those connections with different practices in the community to make sure you have adequate patients being referred to you. And another thing to consider in a larger group, you are going to have other partners. You want to make sure that when you interview at a private practice setting, that you meet a variety of the people there and get a sense of how you might mesh with them, get a sense of how the practice is run overall in terms of equity. Senior partners in some cases may take a call schedule more that they prefer, or the way that costs are shared and stuff may be different, just depending on what group you're in. So you want to get a sense of kind of the fairness and the structure of how senior and junior partners interact in a larger group setting. But overall, for me, again, this I think has been a good choice. I'm still relatively early on in my career, but I feel that, kind of going back to what Dr. Birks talked about with the seasons of life, that I have the ability in my current job to kind of flex to doing more research time later on in my career if I'd like, versus more clinical time, where I am at currently. And I like that I have the option to be involved in, as I mentioned, the clinical side, teaching and research as well. I recently took over as Associate Program Director for the University of Washington Fellowship Training Program. So that's just another role that I get to work in now, in addition to my private practice group, which I think is, again, just kind of speaking to the opportunities that I've had through this particular unique practice. But I know there are other practices a lot across the country that are also kind of the similar hybrid model of academics and private practice blend. Anyway, for me, it's been a good fit. And I think I'm going to stop there, but I'll be happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Winterroth. That was such a nice segue into that. We started with careers in different directions and switching to blended careers. And the lines are blurring. There are no buckets anymore. And it was so inspiring to see how well you've blended the two careers in private practice and seeing your patients in a larger group practice. And, I can see your joy of academia in teaching and being part of the fellowship program. And with that, I'm going to move to our next speaker, Dr. Jennifer Maloney, who is an allergist immunologist, and she's in industry. She's actually my boss at where I work. And again, shout out for blended careers. I get to see patients, and she's been very supportive of having an academic role where I work. She is currently an executive medical director at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals and has extensive experience in late clinical development and clinical trials. I'll hand it over to Dr. Maloney. Welcome.
Great, thank you. So I'll just kind of take you guys quickly through my career path. And, when I was in fellowship, I never would have imagined really being in industry, but I'll explain to you how I got there. So I trained at Mount Sinai in allergy immunology. I had fantastic mentors with Hugh Sampson, Scott Sisher, and then also Charlotte Cunningham Rundle. So we had a really nice blended fellowship there. And I had so much support. I stayed on the pediatric side because I'm pediatric trained with Hugh and Scott for about 1.5 to 2 years after fellowship, and was really in the more research path at that point. I was about 70% research, 20% seeing patients. I was both working at the bench and then doing some more translational and clinical research. It was kind of like a blended model there as well. And ended up moving into my first industry position really because I was inspired by someone who was working at Shearing Plough, which that company actually is not in existence anymore. It was taken over by Merck. But this allergist pulmonologist, Hendrik Nolte, who is just a phenomenal immunotherapy expert. And he recruited me to come and work with him on the sublingual immunotherapy tablet programs. And I'm sure you guys have probably heard of those products. But we basically developed Grastek, Raguatec, and Odactra while I was at Shearing Plough, which then during my time there actually was taken over by Merck. So I was within that position within clinical development, running these large programs for about 7 years. And then I moved companies and kind of bounced around a little bit. Within industry, I was in late stage clinical development at Shearing Plough and Merck. And then there's so many positions for physicians within industry. So you don't necessarily have to be running clinical trials, but also I took a role in patient safety for a short period of time, just to kind of learn that aspect of drug development and really understand the regulations there. And then ultimately was brought back to Regeneron, where I took on a clinical development position, and again was really inspired because I was asked to come and lead the eosinophilic esophagitis program. And back when I was at Mount Sinai, I had actually began a multidisciplinary clinic with a gastroenterologist and our dietitian focusing on patients with EOE. And so to have that opportunity to actually run the program to bring therapeutic to that population was super inspiring. And so I was working on the dupilumab program up until recently, and have again within Regeneron switched roles, and now I'm leading the allergy, basically the allergy franchise within Regeneron. But there are just so many different things that one can do. Clinical development is a really fun position, and kind of touching on what Dr. Stone said, you work with so many experts, between people that are working in developing the molecules in the lab, to your biostatistician colleagues, to the regulatory colleagues. And so you're constantly learning, and really no one day is like the next. There's always some fun problem to troubleshoot, and Deepti can attest to that. Just the things that you would never even imagine kind of coming in contact with. But it's great because when you're dealing with bringing important medicines to large groups of people, particularly when you're dealing with diseases with large unmet medical need, you really feel so happy about what you're doing at the end of the day. So I'll stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and feel free if my email can be sent to people if people have specific questions that they don't feel comfortable asking in a large forum. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Maloney. And she's my mentor at Regeneron. And my first question when I met her was, what do you do and what do people do in industry? So she's very good at explaining a lot of those things. I understand more of it now and with the interdisciplinary teams and one-on-ones, but she's been an amazing mentor. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. With that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Scherzer for our wrap up, but I want to thank all of our panelists for this amazing discussion today.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate all of your insights, and I can already see some great questions that are coming into the chat. We're going to go through a bunch of these questions, so we appreciate if the panelists are okay staying. We know everyone has had a long Zoom day, so we appreciate you continuing on in our virtual world. I think through the discussion you've heard so far, there is just such a broad array of where you can work in allergy and immunology. You can work in private practice, academics, pharma, working for a pharma company. You can work for the government. You can be someone who does allergy and immunology. You can be someone who specializes in immunology and does bone marrow transplant, and anything in between. Whatever you're interested in, there is an area in allergy and immunology that you will find a home in. And like you've heard from several other people, your home may change. You may find one area that you love and then love something else as you move along in the field. And it's really when you get in the field and are practicing and are seeing patients and are asking those questions from a research standpoint that you can get a great idea of where you might want to go. The first question, I'm just going to read the first question real quick. For those who had a gap before starting fellowship, was there any difficulties navigating into fellowship after taking a break in respects to working before going into fellowship? What advice would you give to a young learner who maybe was going to take gap between residency and fellowship?
Hi, this is Melody. I'll just answer quickly. So I had a 15-year gap. So it's hard to go from being faculty to being a fellow. So don't make it too long because, I was already, I had fellows and residents and med students rotating through my clinic. And then I had to kind of shuffle back down, the ladder a bit to do my fellowship. So that was the toughest adjustment for me. But I think it's helpful to already be involved. I kind of answered already to be involved in research so you have an idea of what's expected of you and it makes your application look better.
I agree. As a program director, I actually don't worry if you have been out for a couple of years and practicing. What we want to see is that there's that continued interest in allergy and immunology. So working with your allergy and immunology group, if you have one on a research project or QI, or if you don't have one where you're working, thinking about ways that you can continue to ask questions and be involved in the field, going to meetings, those kind of things can really help. So I think it's just showing a commitment to the field. I think that's the most important thing when you're taking time off. And at least as a program director, we have several other program directors that are here on board. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I will just add that I agree doing research really would make a difference during that year. But I know that every institution doesn't have an allergy program that you might be able to jump on a research project with. But think about the areas that we intersect with other specialties. The beauty of allergy immunology is that the immune system really knows no bounds. And so if you are interested in asthma and you don't have an allergist to work with during that gap year, try to work with pulmonary. Or if you're interested in eosinophilic esophagitis, try to work with GI. There are lots of different areas that you can work in and still do really meaningful research that will be helpful for your application if you don't have a direct allergist mentor that you can work with.
I think that stands true for if you're at a medical school or a residency that doesn't have an allergy immunology group. There are lots of ways to still think about how you can incorporate QI projects or other research projects with other groups, pulmonary in your primary care clinic. I know that all of the folks who were involved in the Chrysalis program had someone that they could reach out to and speak to, a mentor, either a fellow in training or a faculty member. And one of the things, and Mari's on the line here, one of the things that we were collecting was, if you're somewhere who doesn't have AI locally that you can reach out and work with, how can we help you through the academy? So reach out and use the resources through the academy, whether it's because you're taking time off or whether it's because you're at a medical school or residency program that doesn't have allergy immunology. There's resources out there, and we want to help.
And I'll give insight. I just did this. I graduated in 2020. I had a 7-year gap between my residency and applying for fellowship, of which I was on bed rest for 10 months with my twins and just having had them. I interviewed 8 days after I had my twins. It can be done. The questions are interesting if you've been out for a while, I will say that. But it can be done. My focus was pediatric asthma. I had not worked in allergy immunology, was just fascinated with everything that it was different things on the horizon. Everything I learned in medical school was getting obsolete by the time I was learning how we practiced medicine and the treatments we could offer. And so I was fascinated with allergy immunology, applied for that. My background was in pediatric asthma, built a program in pediatric asthma, started that, and we talked about that, and it worked out. The questions were there, why so late, why this, why that, but it can be done. Our next question is, for those involved in research, where did you gain exposure, learn those skills without a PhD? Did a fellowship provide you opportunities to try bench and clinical research, and insights on navigating that?
Well, let me jump in on this one real quickly and say you do not need a PhD to do research. Bench research, clinical research, any of it. I don't have a PhD, although people keep giving me one. But easiest PhD I've ever gotten. The key thing for research is really getting the experience. And so that means that you want to go to a program and ideally even get experience in med school, but and possibly with residency, although that gets a little more dicey unless you are really guaranteed that you want to do a research career. But for fellowship, you want to look at fellowship programs that have a decent research experience. And people may not entirely agree with me as I say this because I'm biased, to say the least. But I think you want to look for programs, if you are interested in research, you want to look for programs that have a significant opportunity for you to do whatever kind of research you're interested, whether that's bench, clinical, translational, whatever. And please don't yell at me for this, but there are programs that do sort of research light, where they're more clinical. The projects that they do are more sort of like chart review / just quality improvement. You still have to do quality improvement, but if you really want a research career, you want to go somewhere where there are people that have more detailed research, and that's what you're looking for. I would say that it doesn't even have to be allergy and immunology. And so, you want to get, if you want a research career, you want an experience during your fellowship that is going to give you an in-depth research experience. If that's on sickle cell disease, so be it. What you're going to do then is change that focus as you move forward in your career, but you need the skill sets, and that's really what you want to get out of that time in the fellowship. They're going to teach you the allergy piece clinically, but the research piece, you want those skill sets. I mean, if other people disagree with me, go ahead, but I think that's what you want to look for if you really want a research career. And don't worry about the degree. As long as you can do research and you're successful doing research, you'll be successful getting grants and continue to keep your research options going. It doesn't matter what comes after your name for that.
Thank you, Dr. Grayson. And I think that answered the next question too. Just the next question was, what are some pearls that you can offer for an incoming first-year AI fellow who's interested in a career in a lab-based physician scientist position? And I think what Dr. Grayson said is just true. As you're looking through your fellowship programs and you're trying to decide where you're going to interview, and then when you go to make your rank list, make sure you've looked that up, you've researched it, you've asked those questions on your interview day. Just like here, any question is fair game. On your interview day, the same thing. Find out what you need to know, what you want to know. Is this a location that has the structure to allow you move into that kind of career?
And Becky, just to back up on the mentor piece, what you want to do is you want to find someone who's done the career path you want to do, ideally. so that you can learn and work with them to move forward. So I think that regardless of what your career path is, but that's a piece that you should be looking for in your fellowships.
And I'll add one, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and I was so fascinated with the bench career as I entered the AI fellowship. I did 2 months in a lab. I've never picked up a pipette in my life before that. Well, that's not true. I did many, many years ago. And 2 months into it, I realized it's fascinating. But before I learned the F in flow cytometry, someone else has already done so much more. So I decided I will learn how to read other people's flow cytometry, walk myself out of the lab, and I do clinical research. So sometimes it's just worth doing it. What is it that's the right fit for you? It looked fascinating. From outside, 2 months, it's still fascinating. It's just not the right fit for me. So get into the lab for a couple months, pick up the pipette if that's something you want to do. Dr. Grace is laughing, but.
No, it's all good. All I just said was just don't break it. Okay, to go in the lab and pick up the pipette, just don't break the pipette.
I did do all the training and everything. Dr. Burks knows I had so many of these conversations with soul-searching questions at the Quad AI faculty development meeting and what it meant and what that career path looked like. And I did my 2 months in the lab. I really had no idea what I was going to do, and that's okay not to know. That was also something I learned, that it's okay to try, it's okay to walk away. I do really suggest you should take the Quad AI faculty development program. It's one of the best things that happened to me. And Dr. Carter is giving me a thumbs up because she was there, and so was Dr. Burks. And Dr. Burks presented the Simone's maxims there, and he says, institutions don't love you, people do, people do. People do love you, and they have your back, and they are invested in your success. Reach out. Our next question is for Dr. Carter and everyone else. Could you discuss the challenges or downside to working for the NIH, in your opinion?
I think I answered that question, but I'll just briefly say, just working for the federal government is a little tough because it is the federal government. They have a lot of rules and regulations. So they have a lot of rules and regulations that everybody else is supposed to follow, but they make you do it at the NIH. So you can't, your collaborations have to all be approved. You can't talk to industry and do lectures for industry like you can in academics and some of those other things. And when you want to do a collaborative research project, which I'm trying to work on one with the Brigham right now, sometimes we get a little bit pushed to the side because they think that the government has so much paperwork that has to be crossed off and, T's crossed and I's dotted that other people don't have to deal with. So that's just the main thing but there's so many other good things for working for the federal government, but for me, that's the most restrictive. And Kelly may have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I agree. So I would say that for me personally, the benefits far outweigh some of the challenges. And I think in any environment that you choose, there are pluses and minuses. And certainly being a federal employee is challenging, and there are years that are more challenging than others. But there are also a lot of benefits depending on what you want to do. So staff clinician positions at the NIH are outstanding positions for people who are really interested in doing both clinical and basic science research. And there are other programs there. Melody had mentioned both intramural, but also extramural, overseeing some of the national studies in food allergy and atopic dermatitis and asthma. So yeah, being a government employee is challenging, but my personal view is that the benefits outweigh those challenges, and the challenges are everywhere. They're just different challenges.
Thank you both for those great responses. We're going to move on to the next question. Someone asked tips that we could offer to an aspiring allergist immunologist who is specifically training in internal medicine, knowing that when you come in, so I don't know if the audience knows, but when you come in and do allergy and immunology, a lot of times there's some programs that are across the board 50-50, and you spend half your time in peds and half your time in adults. There are ones that are more peds based and ones that are more adult based. but you always have to have cross training. We're one of the few fields you have to have cross training. So at least 20% of your time will be spent in cross training. So if you come into an internal medicine program, at least 20% of your time will be in pediatrics. If you come into a pediatric program, at least 20% of your time will be based in adult. And really, because our field is, somebody said earlier, it really is the entire lifespan. And programs want you to leave them able to practice anywhere and take care of somebody at any age with any disease process. So panelists, what would you give, and I throw it back the other way too, if you're coming in from a pediatric residency program, what are some tips that you have to ensure that folks who are at least going to spend some time in a different age range than they're spending in their primary residency program?
I can start. This question stood out to me because I'm an internal medicine trained physician. Mitch, Dr. Grayson is too, so he might have some thoughts on this as well. But I don't see it as a downside at all. You know, having been a former co-training program director, we don't really look at it and say, oh, this person is medicine or this person is peds. Now, depending on the program that you are looking at going to, you know, if the program has only the minimal cross training, so it's 80% peds and 20% internal medicine, then, you know, that might be something to think about. But for programs that are more equally balanced, I don't think it makes a difference whether you're internal medicine or pediatrics. What I think makes a huge difference is your attitude towards training. You know, when you're going into allergy immunology, all of the programs really want to see that you want to do this and you understand that this is something that is really from birth to death specialty. And so being really open to seeing new age groups and being really open to learning and expressing that as you're kind of looking at the programs, I think makes a really big difference. I'm not a pediatrician, and now I work in a primary pediatric, you know, environment. And so, you know, the really cool thing about this specialty is that you really can do anything. And so I don't think that there's a downside being IM or pediatrics. Obviously, medicine peds is great for this because you're already very comfortable with all of the age groups, but it's neither one is a barrier.
I would echo what Princess just said. I don't know if she's that way on my screen. I have no idea where she is on your screen. I'm an internist that's a division chief in the Department of Pediatrics. It doesn't matter. What I would say is if you're a little worried about it, remember that you will have co-fellows. So the pediatricians will not know how to treat an MI. No offense to the pediatricians know how to treat an MI. And the internists are not going to have any clue about all these names of all these diseases in pediatrics. Talk to each other. You know, it isn't that complicated, and you're going to focus on allergy. And I think the key of it is this is a great specialty because you can come from either side, and it's all one group once you're allergy trained. So I don't think it's a thing to worry about, to be honest with you.
I'm going to throw in, there was a question a little bit lower that kind of fits into this. In what setting is it most possible to truly see all ages of patients? Peds versus adult? Is it more academics versus private, rural versus urban? How about all of the above? It really depends on the kind of practice that you're looking at. So I think private practices definitely see all ages, but even in academic centers, you have plenty of academic centers where children to adults can be seen in that clinic. Even I'm in a pediatric hospital, so most of the patients I see are pediatrics, but 10% of our admissions are adults. So I have done consults on patients that are 2 days old and 64 years old at a pediatric hospital. And I know a lot of adult hospitals will see kids down to a certain age. So it really just depends on the practice, on what age range you're going to see. And that will be one of the things you look at as you start looking at where you're going to work and how you're going to work. Is if you're somebody who loves all ages, you're going to find where that is for you. But I throw that out to the panelists.
I'll answer this. In private practice, I think most of us see a pretty even split of adult and pediatric patients. But that being said, again, we have many different offices, and there's certain offices that are in a particular part of town where there's a lot of young families. And so you may see more pediatric and food allergy there versus another one of our clinics that's further north of the city has a larger elderly Medicare population. You may see more asthma COPD patients there. So I agree, it's definitely important to ask those kinds of questions when you're interviewing, just to get a sense of, in that particular area where you are, what's the mix like.
Becky, partly in follow up to that, but then a couple other questions talk about, again, the peds versus adult part, the rural versus city, and then the academic part. I think the people that are most helpful as you think about like a clinician educator in an academic place versus a practice, or somebody that's been out like in the 7 to 10 year range. Many of you will have friends that are out a couple of years, and it's really, they're still kind of stuck in that first season. And you want somebody in this kind of second to third season to have some seasoning and have a little bit of perspective that will help you do some of these things. And like if you get way too far, like the season I'm in, like I'm not relevant to help you like in that first couple of seasons. So look for that person that's doing the job that you might want to talk about, that's 7 to 10 years ahead of you. That helps the most.
And if you really don't want to quit practicing for many years, will be the best thing is to practice a little bit of pediatrics. The more pediatrics you do, the more you're going to practice longer. I keep practicing because of the kids. They make me so happy, and I smile, and they bring me all these drawings, and I just enjoy it. So, and I sometimes don't enjoy the parents as much, but you have to deal with them. But the kids are the ones that are going to keep you going. So any practice, try to get lots of kids to be able to see them and keep you happy every day.
This is great advice on peds versus adult medicine. I'm peds trained, worked in hospital medicine for a while. And, by the time they get to the teenage years, you're like, thank God they grow up and then they move on to other, people. Because teenage years are, there's some teenagers that restore my faith in teenage life and others that don't. But when I started fellowship, I realized adults aren't half as bad as I thought they would be. The first month I walked around with this little notebook of saying, how do you spell that med that you're taking? And what is it that you have? But then you realize that the AI language is common, and the reason you see them for spans across the ages. So it gets better. Adults aren't half as bad. I'm peds trained. I love the kids until they get to teenage years, but just my thought. We have another question as a clinical educator role. Any suggestions on, it seems like both academics and private practice could be a good fit. Any suggestions on how to decide between the two? Thoughts about that?
In private practice, you can choose, and you can be able to dictate whom you want to see. For example, how you want to, educate them, whether they are residents or they are fellows or they are. You can decide that. You can decide if you can get physician assistants. I do have from nursing, all the gamut. So you can decide what you want to do and when you want to do it in your own time. There are lots of organizations will come and use you to train their residents and their fellows and whatever around you. If you don't have people around, they will come to you.
And related, there's another question. I'll add that so more people can answer for that. Is what are some specific teaching opportunities available during fellowship that residents should ask about during fellowship interviews if they're interested in the clinical educator path?
I'll take a quick jab at that. I love being in the role of an educator, and I'm very lucky. I have several roles in medical education, and part of it is putting yourself out there and asking how you can help. So, and we like to involve our fellows in resident education. So it's not just in the clinic or on the consult wards, but also, they're helping give the lectures for the resident lecture series. What does the institution have in general as education for fellows? Are they somewhere that provides, a fellows lecture series that would include topics on, fellows as educators? So asking those kind of questions, I think, is really important. I think also getting involved in the field, so being involved as an FIT can be very helpful. There's different committees that you can play a role on, and several of them are involved in education. So I think it's putting yourself out there. Sometimes you have to get a little bit out of your comfort zone to reach out, especially nationally, but it is worth it because there are so many places that allergists play a role in education, and an important role in education.
I'll just say really quickly too that some of the programs will also have a clinician educator fellowship at the particular institution. And even if you're not necessarily interested in doing that, you might be able to take a couple of the courses or have some exposure with that too. So that's also something to ask about, and those can sharpen the skills that you have. And you'll get to obviously practice those with the residents and the medical students as well too. But I would ask specifically about that.
All right, I'm putting the next two questions together. What community health or public health opportunities and career paths are available, including topics such as population health efforts in allergy and immunology?
Rebecca, the ones I've seen that have had those have either been through like the CDC programs. Some of the NIH programs will allow people to do some training and think about the broader areas like that. And then trying to find people that are trained like that, but allergy immunology is not their specialty, then those are the helpful places I think I would look.
I think looking for places that have a strong group for advocacy can play a role. So even if you go somewhere, just like what Dr. Brooks was saying, and there maybe it's not the allergy immunology group that's involved, but the hospital itself is very involved in advocacy, because there's so many ways that you can help your local community and your national community that don't have to be specifically in a program. But again, if that's the institution where you're at, what are their thoughts on that? And what roles do they play? All right. I'm going to jump to the next one. We're going to kind of put it together. There's a couple in there that are talking about what can people do to help build a stronger application? So what can they do so that when they're applying to fellowship, because we know that you all are going to be interested in allergy immunology, because we've spent the past hour and 45 minutes convincing you what an awesome career this is. What can everyone do? What can you do as you start thinking about putting your application together to apply for fellowship?
Becky, I'll just say a couple of things. One would be that they have a mentor in their program that's some way in the diseases related to allergy, whether they don't have an allergy program and they're working with someone in pulmonary for asthma, they're working with a gastroenterologist on EOE or something in the field, and just show interest that you're doing something, you've accomplished something through the projects that you have. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as you begin to think about interviewing the process, then you need to be able to articulate what you might want to do. And I know all of the program directors and people that have interviewed for fellows have heard someone come in and say, you know, I like research and I like education and I like seeing patients. And when I hear that, that means like, and I want to do that in my career in an academic setting. And what that helps me understand, they don't really understand, they've not talked to enough of their mentors to know what kind of career paths they are. So it's a big deal to understand the career paths, like as a clinician educator, a clinician scientist, a bench scientist, and what you might be interested in, and then you express the interest in that. But to say that you're interested in everything really means nothing that you're interested in, because it means that you hadn't really thought through what you might want to do. So have a track record there, and then really know what you can come out of it. You may decide that you start out as a clinician educator and you come out and you look like Mitch, or you may start out as a physician scientist and you come out as a clinician educator. Doesn't mean you can't change, but have an idea, understand what those pathways are.
I would say the thing is that it can change, and don't think that when you're looking for a fellowship, you're not locking yourself in. So it's what you think at this time you might want to do. The other thing I was going to say is, everybody knows me, I joke about this all the time. Don't lie to us when you interview. If you want to go into private practice, tell me you want to go into private practice, because I can help you, maybe not as well as other people, but I can help you with private practice. It's not going to do you any good to tell me that you want to be a physician scientist if your goal in life is to go into private practice, because I'm going to try and figure out ways you're going to become a physician scientist, which won't help you at all. So just be truthful. I know that there's stuff out on the web that says that you all want to be physician scientists and you all want to be NIH funded. That's garbage. You want to tell people what you really want to do and follow that through.
Yeah.
And again, you're not locked into it. So yeah.
I'll throw out to, this will be helpful mostly for the residents who are getting ready to apply for fellowship, but know your application really well. Put things on your application that you can talk about. If you did research as an undergrad that would be something that you would want to talk about, or that would be meaningful to this application, you can put that on there, but you need to be able to answer questions about it. You need to be able to talk about it and understand every part of it. I think it's really, it's always hard in an interview when somebody brings something up and the person who's interviewing doesn't have a full comprehension of the project they did or an understanding of different committees maybe they've listed. So just really knowing your application, putting things on there that you've done and you followed through and you can talk about, I think is really important. And I think there are probably going to be people out there who didn't realize they love the field of allergy and immunology until they maybe rotated in a clinic or came to the meeting or some way. It's okay if you're someone who came into the field late. We want you, definitely, the advice I always give is try to get involved. Let's try to get you a research project that's meaningful to you and get you into the Quad AI and involved that way. But it's okay if that's how it works out. But just make sure your application is everything that you can talk about and that you can understand and follow through with if anyone has any questions.
I'll just add, I might have a little bit of a different opinion on this, but I think it's okay not to know exactly what you want to do at your stage also. I 100% agree with Mitch. It's not okay to say that you want to go into something that you don't intend to do just because you think it might make you look like a better or more competitive applicant. But I think, the main thing is to really have passion for the field and truly want to go into it and truly be open to learning. I find it rare that someone coming from residency knows exactly where they're going to land in 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. Having a good idea of the path that you might be interested in is helpful. But I think the more important thing really is to be very interested and open in learning. Because even if you don't go into that path, you'll learn a lot from it. You've heard here before already that you might not become a basic science researcher, but you will be definitely better off if you can understand those concepts. You can understand the field a lot better later. So being open and to learning, I think, is really important. But I don't know that you have to know exactly what you want to do. Some of us don't know what we want to do still in another 5 or 10 years, right? So it's, life is always evolving, but being very passionate and I think makes a big difference.
This topic goes along with another question down the pike, and then we can move away from it. Somebody asked how, if you're an applicant from somewhere whose home program doesn't have AI, how do you stand out, especially in this era of COVID, because away rotations really have been closed down. We are hopeful that things will start opening up, but I think that it is just, again, showing dedication and passion for the field. You can do asthma research in your primary care clinic with the pulmonologist. You can do drug allergy research in your primary care clinic. Our primary care clinic has taken lead on working through getting a lot of patients into our clinic so that we can do amoxicillin challenges. So there's ways to still practice in AI with other groups. It's just thinking about what question do you have and how do you want to answer it? So it's just looking for those opportunities that can really help your application. We totally recognize there's 85 fellowship programs and there's 200 pediatric residency programs and hundreds more internal medicine. So we know that you may not have a program locally, but it's looking for what opportunities you can find where you are. And I'll throw that out to the panelists because I think we've all worked with fellows who have come from programs that don't have AI locally.
Becky, I would totally agree that you'll just finding the areas that you like in the field, even though you don't have a fellowship program there. It's not a, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It doesn't put people in a secondary place to try to find a position.
All right, I think maybe we have time for one or two more questions. I know all of the fellows in training and the medical students and the residents, everyone's had a very long Zoom day. So we appreciate that you're holding on this long, and we'll just do maybe one more question.
Becky, can I ask if people have questions, or can we just stick our email or something in the chat box?
Oh, that would be wonderful. Anyone who's interested, I was going to end this with,
okay,
this group here is passionate about helping bring in the next generation of learners. So anyone who's willing to do that, for sure, but nobody feel obligated.
Yeah, and Mari can, after the Zoom today, send out like the people that are talking, all of the emails en masse to help everybody.
That would be great. Thank you. And, also they're welcome to reach out to both Becky and the FIT leadership as well. We're happy to help navigate that process. If you want to get in touch with people, aren't able to, we can also try to help facilitate that. It takes a village, and it takes people in that village, and we're here. We're all here to help navigate this process. And this group has been the most amazing resource.
Maybe we'll take one last question, I think, because there's a bunch of people on this panel who have had a lot of transitions. How do you transition into leadership and administrative roles? Do you have experience from early career stage, or are these opportunities just kind of present themselves? How do you move forward into areas that include leadership and administration?
I think they were asking Mitch and Wesley that question, and Princess specifically.
So I could tell you mine, but Dr. Burks has done a lot more of this than I have. By the way, he's down there on my screen. So thank
you, Mitch. I appreciate that. So the leadership opportunities that come to you already have them. You're a leader in your residency program. You're a leader in your fellowship program. You're a leader in committee work that you do, whatever it is. There are those leadership opportunities that you take advantage of to learn things. Then those build on, and as you go into different seasons of your career, you would have, and the question was about a clinician scientist, that those aren't the only people that will become leaders of divisions and departments. But the people that are good leaders will become division leaders and department leaders and other things. So use the milieu that you're in now, all the different opportunities, just like you, through your secondary training through college, you had leadership opportunities and you took advantage of them. Do it now. You learn new things. And then as you get to the next season, as you're at the right timing to become a division chief, it's, again, not a physician scientist, you have good leadership skills. And the same thing for a department or a school or whatever it might be. The academy, the other organizations that you can be part of are unbelievable opportunities for obtaining leadership skills. There's so many different groups and committees, the things that you can do, that you learn how to, as I said earlier, you learn how to run a meeting well. You learn how to interact with a group of people to lead them, as opposed to telling them what to do. And you get that all along the way in the academy and other organizations outside of work, that you take those skills and put back in the work that you're doing.
And just one other plug for the Academy. There is a leadership program in the Academy. That's a 2-year program that train you in leadership positions in the Academy that is helpful for other leadership positions also.
And I would agree with all of that. And you get those skills even without the leadership, even with just running committees and things like that. The other thing I would say is, again, putting in a plug for mentors. You have there are people that have gone before you, and by talking to them and learning from them, even when you go into the positions, in the leadership positions, there's still going to be other division directors or people that have moved on beyond that you're going to continue to talk with and you're going to continue to use as mentors. The Academy has a division directors, I don't know what the hell it is. I guess it's committee. I don't know if it's committee, assembly. But I'm not really sure what it is, but there's a group thing for division directors where we can all, run things by each other, talk to each other. And that sort of continuing mentoring, I think, is a very helpful piece as well.
And I just, if I can just add on to that, throughout my career, I go back to mentors from very early on. And there's not a week that goes by that I don't think of past mentors in certain situations. And as Mitch said, learning just from observing them and how they handled things. And people who I didn't really appreciate that there were great mentors back at the time. When I was a fellow, my division chief, I appreciated, but once I moved on with my career and I look back, I appreciate them much more and continue to learn from them. So mentorship and observing, sort of people who you respect and you want to be like is absolutely critical.
And just another comment from the FIT committee, in baby steps, we are looking for our new vice chair. So please do apply. These are baby steps, very mentored leadership opportunities. Dr. Stone has been one of our mentors in the FIT committee before. It's Dr. Tim Craig from the board. These are wonderful, wonderful opportunities to learn more about leadership, make more relationships with people, networking, and I have learned so much along the way. So please do apply.
Yeah, sometimes you have to go a little bit out of your comfort zone and say, yes, you will do that project, write that manuscript, join that committee, and then go in and do a great job. And people notice that. And then you get asked to do something else. And it really does snowball. But sometimes it starts with just kind of saying yes, and then going in and doing a great job. And there's so many ways to get involved locally and nationally. All right, well, we have gone 1 minute over and we apologize for that, but I think we are going to wrap it up. Mari, I think you're still on the line. Anyone who's comfortable, definitely, I think we can get out all of our email addresses and we want to help, especially those, we want to help everyone. Those who are at institutions that don't have allergy and immunology and we can be of extra assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. The Academy wants to help. We want to find ways to have you learn more about our field and bring you into the field. So everyone, if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you to the panelists. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate your thoughtfulness and your insights and spending the evening or afternoon with us, I guess, depending on where you are in the country. But we appreciate all the attendees. Again, we know you had a very long Zoom day, but we are grateful that you have hung into the bitter end here. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.